we're joined now by our guy Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. Tim, what's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going, y'all?
EV, what's up, man? Are you over the old waste management photos, man? I think the coaches are going to take a little bit of a break here after putting in some significant time coming off the heels of that junior day.
Yeah, it's good to see. I'm glad these guys get a bit of a break because with the way the calendar worked, especially this year, there was no downtime in December, which you typically get like a week or two of something of a downtime. Typically you get at some point in January a bit of a downtime too, and there was none of that this year. So I'm glad they're getting a bit of a break. I'm sure they're already looking forward to those 2 weeks in July where nothing happens, where they can truly be off. So. I'm happy for them, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
So, TV, does this time of year mean you get a couple weeks where you get to chill a little bit too, or is there no rest for the wicked here?
No, it's slower for sure in Feb, which is nice. For me, that means just hey, I'm kind of peeking over at the draft and doing some work over there and doing what I can over there. I always like kind of evaluating some of these guys from a longer term perspective and kind of evaluating, okay, hey, what did I miss this time in the recruiting cycle coming out where this guy's now a first round pick or a second round pick, and I wasn't familiar with him coming out of high school, or I didn't have a super high grade on him coming out of high school.
Tim, can you kind of see what Nebraska's doing with the long play here with 26s, 27s, and 28s with how you think this roster is going to shape out based on whom isn't getting the offers?
Yeah, I would say this. I thought I was a bit surprised at how many 26 offers they made in January while on the road. I was going back through it yesterday and kind of running through some of the names. Some of those guys they offered and they're already out of the mix for. That just happens. That's recruiting nowadays where these things move so fast. There was a couple guys Nebraska offered. Like there was a guy Nebraska offered the day before he announced the top 5. Like you're never going to make the top 5 just because of kind of the timing of everything. But yeah, I think the overall strategy, what you're seeing is one, they're not leaving any stone unturned in the sense that you kind of get a feeling that they're making certain offers, not necessarily because they know they're going to be actually be involved in that recruitment, but because they want to build that relationship early, just in case down the line that guy's in the transfer portal. And that goes for 26 and beyond. But I think you're seeing a more strategic approach. Like I don't think they're casting as wide of a net as they did under when Garrett McGuire and Evan Cooper were on staff, specifically at wide receiver and DB. I think there's a strategy for specifically the types of bodies they want to add or the type of athletes they want to add at those respective positions. And I think there's a vision coming together. Like I think the DB board, every offer is strategic. Right now, the receiver board is a bit, it's a bit scattershot, but you have an idea of what they're looking for.
So, Tim, you mentioned you kind of turn your eye to the NFL draft a little bit this time of the year, and I'm curious. We had this conversation earlier in the week. One of our listeners brought up the question, and I'm wondering if you're looking at the guys for Nebraska that would be draft eligible after next season. Who are some of the guys that would be most interesting to you if you're an NFL scout?
Yeah, I was listening to this discussion by y'all early this week, and I obviously Dane Key, Deshaun McCullough, going to be in that conversation. Andrew Marshall potentially. There's a couple guys that are very obvious. I thought the Heinrich Haarberg mentioned by y'all was interesting because I just think that type of athlete, specifically that position, and the history of these tight end risers in the draft, and if like y'all are saying, if Matt Rhule is for real, and I think he is for real about the type of athlete Heinrich Haarberg is, I think he's going to open some eyes this year from the tight end position with all the different things he can do. And I think a team's going to be intrigued just that, like, again, up at the NFL, they're trying to go positionless too. And, I think a guy like Heinrich Haarberg kind of intrigues people just because of the combination of size and athleticism.
Now, unfortunately, this stemmed on the heels of talking about a guy I'm not as big of a fan of, but he said, hey, Ravi said, if Emmitt Smith, one of his best attributes has got to be his availability. That's kind of what I think. And I was like, yeah, I agree, right? That's being available is part of it. I think that's going to be a lot of what we see in Haarberg too, because he's relentless. He's one of the first guys on the practice field. He's certainly one of the last to leave. He's a high energy guy. He gets a ton of reps everywhere. He's just a guy that if you watch him, you're going to notice him, if nothing else, just by accident.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, and on top of that, this time next year, he's going through the interview process and through the combine and stuff, talking to coaches. Coaches are going to fall in love with that guy.
He'll win that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, Tim, is there anyone, because I know everybody always talks about the trenches and we're interested on the trenches. Like, is there anyone, I know Nebraska is going to be younger on the defensive line. So you're looking at, although technically Riley Van Poppel will be draft eligible after next year. And then on the offensive line, even a guy like Gunnar Gatula ends up being draft eligible. Like, is there anybody on the lines that you even look at as their frame and say, hey, if they have a breakout year, maybe one of these guys could push through also and be interesting?
Yeah, I think the guys on both sides of the line right now, I think they're going to see out their careers like 4 or 5 years, however much. I think they're going to see out their eligibility. That's just like, at this point, I don't think Riley Van Poppel, for example, is going to have a year where he leaves with the top 3 round grade next year. Even though he hypothetically could, I don't think he's going to have that kind of year. If he does, Nebraska's going to be better off for it, if he has a Ty Robinson type season. But yeah, I mean, he's one that I think is going to draw some just because of the frame. I think on the offensive side of the ball, I think Justin Evans and Henry Lutovsky are both going to be guys that draw some attention. Obviously, Rocco Spindler is going to draw some attention. I think Rocco at this point is probably going to be a mid to late round pick. I mean, that's what he would have been this year. We'll see how much further his stock can improve. Elijah Pritchett, potentially a good year just because of the natural traits there. If he does end up moving to left tackle and the move does go well because that's his home position, I could see just a world where teams, I mean, it's not even far-fetched for me to see a world where, Elijah Pritchett is suddenly like, hey, being talked about like a top 2 round guy just because of kind of what he's done. I mean, you look across the league right now. I mean, this last year, Amarius Mims was a pretty high pick by the Bengals, despite I think having a season of true starting experience. I think you've got a couple guys in this draft that are similar, just in the sense that they haven't played a whole lot of games, but they're former 5 stars. They have those elite bodies, and they play very high. So for Pritchett, it's not the fact that he hasn't played a whole lot of games. It's the fact that the Alabama tape isn't all that good. And so if you get to Nebraska and things start to improve, I mean, that's an NFL level frame that I think teams are going to fall in love with.
TV on the heels of, I told him and Dylan, they got to be trolling me. We on the heels of the last month and a half, I've been talking about like Dylan's development. We heard Coach Rhule reference it at the end of his press conference and in the next steps to making it his team. He's at Westside last night for Westside Miller North basketball. But having said that, it's like, are you kind of tracking and vibing with the next phase in making this his offense? Because I felt like Coach Rhule, and I can't remember who said it, might have been Bruntz or somebody that was like, yeah, you get the sense that wasn't the first time he'd had that conversation with Dylan about the sequential steps into making it this offense. That was fairly detailed and super specific.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a ton of sense that, I mean, for this offseason, I mean, we talked about this a couple weeks ago in the sense of.
You almost had me talked off of Dylan, by the way.
Like a few weeks ago, we had this conversation of hey, who's the guy that takes the step that like takes Nebraska the furthest next year? Like what guy takes a step? I mean, at the end of the day, I think Rhule recognizes if you're former 5-star quarterback with all the elite traits to be one of the top QBs in college football, takes that step as a sophomore, your program ceiling is higher than you can even imagine. Like it raises that ceiling beyond anything you could say. So I think Rhule understands that more than anybody, that, hey, the ultimate key to our long-term ceiling over these next 2 years is on Dylan and how much he buys in, how much of this he takes over for himself, and how seriously he takes all of this. Like, hey, what is he trying to win now? Is he setting himself up for the long term? Because that approach looks very different. If you're trying to win now, you're putting yourself in the best position to win right now. If you're trying to win in the long term, you're doing things and building up yourself, but you have that long-term goal in mind. So where's Dylan at in terms of that? I think he's locked in. I think he's doing a lot of the right things off the field, at least right now, in terms of, engaging himself in the community, being that leader.
I mean, he just goes to high schools sometimes in the area just
Mhm.
for visits. Big towns, small towns. Like his the being the ambassador is fantastic. Just imagine elite level play on the field. I mean, the world would literally be at least the state of Nebraska would
Mhm.
literally be his oyster.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the publicity he's already gotten and all of that, I think he recognizes that too. Like from a branding perspective and his brand, I think there's a bit of motivation in there because, year one was solid but not great. And it does have people. I mean, like, you see the comments about the Mahomes comparisons and all of that. Like, I think there's a world where, he's starting to take that a little personally and is on that. I'm curious to see what type of Dylan we see in the spring. Like, I think we're going to see the competitor. I think we're going to see like a fiery competitor out there. I think we're going to see all of that. I think we're going to see and hear from coaching staffs that, hey, he's doing things in practice that we haven't seen before. He's lighting it up here. He's doing this, he's doing that. Like, we're going to hear these different things just because I still believe that's the level of talent he is. Yeah, he's a guy that I think is highly, highly motivated. And if he's fully bought in, yeah, and he can take that step, like, all the better for Matt Rhule for like pushing him. Because I think this is the thing. Um, I don't think people should read into Rhule's comments as like is Dylan not 100% in? I
Right.
think you should read into those comments as Matt Rhule has elite expectations for his quarterback who is hypothetically elite, who has elite potential, and he wants to help him get there by challenging him at every single point of his career.